Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Finding your foundation. These are 7 questions to help you make core life decisions. Amid life's frenzy, many people pass through their days without having consciously selected their foundational values, those values on which their life's major decisions should be based. These questions may help you develop yours. They're from my new book, Careers for Dummies. First is about the pay continuum. Many people overestimate money's importance. Beyond a middle-class income, money generally doesn't buy much happiness. In many locales, you end up paying half your income that's above $75,000, say, in taxes. So generally, you have to earn a hell of a lot more than $75,000 a year to significantly improve your material lifestyle. An extra $10,000 or $20,000 is unlikely to do it. Perhaps more important, for an employer to pay you big money, you need to make the employer bigger money, and that can bring ethical temptations. There are relatively few careers that pay big money, so your options become limited. Unless you have a shot at being the next Oprah, you may need to forego artistic careers as well as nonprofit work, which you might really like, unless you're a major fundraiser or a film director or whatever. But, in fairness, for some people, money, major money, is important because it's tangible evidence of how much the world values your work. Big money buys things like a nice house in a nice neighborhood. And all things equal, it's better to go for more money than less. I mean, for example, if you like selling and could land a job repping a great product and you're committed to not cutting ethical corners, why not? So I've tried to present both sides fairly. So, how important is money and how much money in the near term, in 5 years, say, from minimum, which would be like $30,000 a year, to $200,000+ a year? The next of the 7 questions toward identifying your kind of core values is what I call the status continuum. Even though status is ineffable, something you can't feel, many people are driven by it. After all, why would somebody buy Gucci, Pucci, Coach, or Chew when they could buy less Tony brands that look and perform essentially as well and still look as good by the time most people decide to change styles? Status. That's why. Why do people, for example, buy a Beamer or a Mercedes or a Jaguar that costs oodles more than a Toyota, even though they break down more? Even though there's no status in standing on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck, many people buy designer label cars, even going into debt to do it. Why? Status. It makes some people feel good to be associated with a status brand name. Of course, that concept of going after status extends to career. It feels good to know, and for others to know, that you're a physician rather than a physician assistant, or a lawyer rather than a hair cutter, even though surveys find that hair cutters have higher average job satisfaction. Oh, and physician assistants and many hair cutters do make a solid living. The question is, for you, how important is status? On one end, no importance. On the other hand, on the other end of the continuum, great importance. The third of the core values that it's worth evaluating for your basis for your decision making is the workload continuum. Work-life balance is high priority for many people. They want to leave ample time for family, for fun, and personal maintenance. For them, a 40-hour work week's pretty much tops. And after work, they're rarely going to engage in professional reading, attend professional workshops, or answer their email after work hours. On the other hand, there are people who find work more rewarding, more contributory, even more pleasurable than what they otherwise might be doing. So, the question is for you, where do you want to be on the workload continuum? Say, less than 20 hours a week and not unduly productivity-oriented, or 60 quite productive hours per week on the other end of the continuum. The next question to get at what your core foundational values are is the ambition continuum. No one gets blamed for wanting to climb the status ladder, the income ladder. So if you say, I'm an individual contributor, but my goal is to be vice president, the response is usually, you go girl, or I guess, you go guy, although I've never heard that sentence uttered. But some people strive upward more because of the praise they'd get than because they really want it, more because of praise than preference. Privately, they'd rather trade the money, the power, the prestige of a big-time job for less stress, and more free time. Or they may realize that if they push upward, they'll rise to their level of incompetence. You spend too much time at work to let societal pressures dictate your level of ambition. Consciously decide how ambitious you want to be. So, on one end, a basic job is fine. On the other, you want to rise as far as you can. Where on that continuum do you want to be? The next continuum regarding core values is the ethical continuum. Most people claim to be ethical, but in real life, as with most human characteristics, there's plenty of variability. For example, some people believe that any sales job or fundraising job, that's the nonprofit analog to sales, is unethical because to be more than just an order taker, you have to manipulate the prospect into buying when he or she would otherwise could buy from some other vendor or donate to another charity. On the other hand, there are some people, as long as they don't commit egregious ethical violations like overtly lying about a product or the benefits that a charitable donation will yield, such people prioritize putting bread on the table. Another example, for one person, anything this side of selling tobacco or mind-altering substances is ethical. For other people, ethics requires clear societal improvement. Of course, that can occur in all sectors, for-profit, non-profit, and government. For example, someone who works for a company that makes best-in-class products such as Toyota, or Apple, or Google, as long as their day-to-day behavior is ethical, they can lay their heads on the pillow with quite a bit of pride. And so can somebody who works for a nonprofit that has demonstrated that it makes a bigger difference than do peer nonprofits. And a person who works for a government agency but belies the stereotype that government does everything poorly but expensively, of course such people can also be proud. So again, I turn to you. Where on the ethical continuum do you want to be? On one end of the continuum, it's anything more ethical than selling addictive drugs, and the other end, Mother Teresa. The next continuum on the core values matter is the redistribution versus merit continuum. The New Testament urges people to prioritize, quote, the least among us. Indeed, that is the core principle of liberal, some would say progressive politics and economics. How can we sit by when some people live in mansions while others live in squalor? In contrast, there are other people who operate from the battlefield medics triage principle. That is, when you have limited resources, you help more people by allocating medical supplies not to the sickest, but to those with the greatest potential to profit. In translating that concept to the career world, some people want to be social workers, inner city teachers, inner city doctors working in emergency rooms, community activists, or nonprofit employees, who usually do focus on the least among us. Others disagree. They believe that despite significant tax dollars spent to close the achievement gap, the evidence is pretty darn clear that the gap remains about as wide as ever, and such people choose to work in organizations that employ and serve high-ability, high-achieving people. For example, a high-quality company that tends to get the, quote, best and brightest, or a private school that's serving intellectually gifted kids. But what about you? Where on that continuum do you want to focus your career efforts? On the least among us on one end of the continuum, or on the other end on high achievers, the so-called best and brightest? And the last of the 7 continua for identifying your core values is the hedonism versus contribution continuum. That continuum is embedded in some of the previous ones I've mentioned, but is so central, it deserves separate attention. That continuum, the hedonism versus contribution continuum, spans 3 philosophies of life. On one end of the continuum is the philosophy or the belief that the life well led is about the pursuit of happiness. You strive to do as little work as possible so you can have as much fun as possible. On the other end of the continuum is the belief that the life well led is defined by spending as many heartbeats as possible, making the biggest contribution possible. So that means working long hours, using your best skills, even if some of the work's unpleasant, because that person knows that greater good accrues from that than from spending discretionary time, for example, watching TV, playing video games, or even extra time with family. And between those 2 extremes is the most commonly held value, balance, the Aristotelian golden mean. It's often referred to as work-life balance. So, where on that continuum do you want to aspire? From the pursuit of happiness / hedonism, on the other end, maximum contribution. Anyway, I think that thinking consciously about your core values, using these 7 questions, can give you a head start on living the life that you want to live. Anyway, again, these are derived from my book, brand new book, Careers for Dummies. I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.